Articulate Storyline is the most popular e-learning authoring tool right now, and there is a healthy demand for people who know this tool. So if you're looking for an instructional design job or you want to land some development work from clients, then you're going to want to add Articulate Storyline to your toolkit. And in this video, I'll show you my recommended approach to learning the tool fast and well. The first thing you'll want to do when you start learning Articulate Storyline is to consult the documentation. So Storyline has great and detailed documentation that will teach you pretty much everything you need to know how to do inside of the tool. So you should definitely take advantage of that. And I can show you some of that right here. You can see their user guide. So we start with some basic lessons on how to create a new project and get started, how to work with the interface. But this skill gets very extensive. You can see we're learning how to work with these built-in quizzes and questions, how to work with all of these different content types, accessibility, screen recordings, literally pretty much everything. Formatting, sizing, and positioning, very important. Adding interactive objects. And this is where Storyline really gets cool when you start adding that interactivity. Because otherwise, Storyline is kind of like PowerPoint. But when you start using the layers, the triggers, the variables, and conditions, that's when you really start seeing the true power of Storyline. But let's imagine you're at square one, you just started your free trial. I would recommend opening up Storyline in one window and opening up the documentation in another window. And I get to that documentation by just Googling Articulate Storyline documentation. And it'll be that first link, open that up, and you'll be at that page I was just on. So I'm going to show you my recommended approach through moving through that documentation, because there's obviously a lot there and some of it is much more important than the other stuff. So the titles you see here will match titles in the documentation itself. So I would recommend first doing these first three introductory lessons. So, these first three right here, and then all of these recommendations are going to line up with these titles in the docs. So what I would recommend doing, come back to this video if you need to, take screenshots of these screens, but I would recommend going through the docs in this order. And for example, this first section, Mastering the Storyline 360 Interface, actually follow along with the documentation and practice using the features that they talk about. Because again, this is important, practice is going to be important every step of the way. If you just go into that documentation and you read it, that's not going to be good enough, right? I mean, if you want, you can look through the docs and, click into the parts that look interesting just to get a little preview. But to actually learn the tool, I suggest using everything that it talks about in one of those little mini tutorials. So don't just read the documentation about how to add a text box. Actually add the text box, type in, play around with it, and do that with every single thing we're going to talk about here. Because that's how you're going to, improve that muscle memory, learn your way around the tool, and slowly work your way towards mastery. So go through that Mastering the Storyline 360 interface. That is obviously necessary if you're going to be spending any serious amount of time in the tool. Go through that Working with Slides and Layers section. Now, if you're familiar with PowerPoint, working with slides will be quite familiar, but layers are an added feature in Storyline, and it is a very powerful feature and you will use them often. So make sure you check out that. This next section is about how to actually start getting some content on the page. So this working with shapes, captions, text boxes, and tables. Okay, so go through the basics first. Then we're gonna go through these content sections. So working with pictures, videos, audio, and text. There's a section in the documentation for each one of these. They might go more detailed than you need to, but just at least look at each of these. Practice adding each type of media to the screen, move it around, resize it, get familiar adding this type of stuff, because this is very foundational. These are very foundational skills in Storyline, and you should know how to do them. Once you're comfortable adding the content and you know your way around the basic interface, it's time to move into some of these more intermediate skills, and this is where Storyline will start getting more interesting. So first, look at formatting, sizing, and positioning objects. Again, practice doing this with different things you have on the screen. These are fundamental tasks. So before we get into interactivity and animations, it's good to have these basics down, know how to position your elements on the screen. Then we get into customizing your course design, and this section will teach you how to actually work with like slide masters and themes and templates, and these things will be very important for speeding up your workflow down the line and just keeping things consistent. So spend your time in this section with the slide masters and the feedback masters, because a lot of newer developers don't really know that those things are there, and it can lead to a lot of confusion down the line if you're not already familiar with how to use those different features. All right, then we will get into timeline, states, and notes. So understanding how the timeline works is very important. So practice moving things around on that timeline. And states is important too, because this is how you'll often use triggers to change the states of things. So you'll have a state of a box could be red, and then you can have a green state where the box is green, and when you click a button or when you answer a certain question, you can change the state of that object. So this is a very important concept for storyline. Spend your time on it when you're in this section of the documentation. Next up, applying animations and slide transitions. This isn't very difficult, but you should know how the timeline works before you start playing around with animations. And I do recommend spending time with animations and timelines. Get a feel for how that works. If you have a 2-second entrance animation and a 2-second exit animation and your timeline is only 3 seconds long, you're going to have some problems. So play around with that, get a feel for how that works and what you can do to break it so you can troubleshoot better down the line. And this is what we have all been waiting for. Once you have a strong handle on these basics, like I kind of refer to some of the stuff as like the PowerPoint features, which you should definitely have down. But once you have that down, it's a good time to move into the interactive objects. And again, if you want to just jump ahead and start playing around with this section just to get excited about storyline and see how you can add that interactivity, that's fine. But don't skip any of these other sections if you want to call yourself a storyline developer, because they are important and they will come into play. But this section right here is the fun one. You're going to get exposed to all the different types of interactive objects and interactivity you can add to your projects. Next up, they have quite a few. They have these 4 sections on the built-in quizzing features. I don't use these features much because I do everything custom for the most part, but there were times when I would work on other projects. Like, the built-in quizzing features are very good for rapidly building scored quizzes. So since so much e-learning out there is like that, where you need to answer these multiple choice questions and get an 80% or above to pass, using these built-in features are a very good way to do that. So you should you should go through this documentation and practice using these features, because odds are when you're working on a real-world project, you will need to use these features and know how they work. All right, and then there are just a couple of more sections in the documentation I would suggest you go through. The first is customizing the player, and this is whatever is around the slide itself. So you can have links to resources, you can control what shows up on the player, like the next and previous buttons or the seek bar, and there are a bunch of settings that you can use to determine how those things work. Or you can get rid of the player completely, and that's the type of stuff that it talks about in this section, so do not skip this section. Next up, previewing and publishing a course. So it's good practice to preview as you go, test as you go, and then this gets into some of the different publish options, which again, you definitely would want to be aware of as a storyline developer. Let me just close that. All right, so these are the main sections of the documentation that I would suggest you take a look at, but if you have the time, I would definitely recommend exploring those other sections, like the section on accessibility. Some of that stuff is definitely important and it may come up, but these are the sections that you will want to cover at a minimum to be doing storyline development work. These are the things that will come up very, very often. So make sure you cover these. Again, use this video as a reference, take screenshots, write these down, but go through that documentation and practice with each of those features. And next up, this is the very important part. Once you've been exposed to each of those basics and you've done it, you don't need to do any big projects as you're going through the documentation. You just want to, get exposed to using that feature so you know it's there. But now it's time to actually do some serious practice by building little interactions and projects. So I would suggest starting simple. Okay, so this is where we're going to really test your ability to like add content to the screen, use states, and use triggers. So simple interactivity and maybe even some layers. So these are like the simple features, and I would definitely recommend practicing with these. So a tab interaction. So this is where you would have like a box where content would go and maybe 3 different tabs at the top. And when you click on one tab, it changes the content of what shows up in the box. If you click another tab, it changes that content again. So definitely, that's a really good way to practice with states and triggers, and I recommend doing this project as one of your first projects because it will help you wrap your head around all of this. I recommend doing a custom drag and drop interaction. So again, this will really test your understanding of triggers, states, and maybe even layers if you decide to go there. So I would recommend, you can have a column on the left, a column on the right, and then like a word. So maybe it's like good things, bad things, and just drag that word to the correct column. If you bring it into the correct one, then, put it in that actual column. And I recommend doing this from scratch versus using their built-in tools, just because this is where you will really get a feel for, again, triggers, states, layers. These, once you know how to use these things effectively, you can build any kind of interaction you want. You won't rely on the built-in interaction types that Storyline makes available. So really practice using those triggers and states and layers effectively. Next up, we have custom slide and feedback masters. Okay, so go into the slide masters and try creating a slide master yourself and then applying it to some slides. Because again, there will be times when it would make much more sense to just build something once on a slide master than to like copy and paste it on 50 different slides. And then when you need to make a change, you can just change it on the master instead of changing it on all 50 of those slides. So the earlier you get comfortable working with masters, the better. And again, feedback masters are in a different place. And I remember, for me this came up, but there will come a time when you're like, I need to change this and I do not know how. And it's better to know about feedback masters when you're learning so that you don't waste time figuring it out when you're actually working on a project for your company or your client. So get familiar with both of those, practice building some and applying them just so that you get comfortable working with them. And next up, I would recommend building one of those built-in quizzes with a results screen. So this is just using, you can use a question bank, you can build out those slides, and it should be fairly straightforward. Use the documentation as needed as a reference, but definitely do a project like this so you can be familiar working with these built-in quizzing features. Because like I said, they're very popular on the job. And then finally, this is a really good one. Build a custom menu from scratch. So practice not using the Storyline menu, but instead build your own little sidebar. Maybe you have 5 different slides you can go to. Keep it simple, but that's a good way to practice where when you click on one of those options, it brings you to this specific slide. So it's just another way to practice with triggers. So there we go. I would suggest building each one of these 5 projects before moving on to anything more complex. And at this point, you should have a really solid understanding of how triggers, states, and layers work. So practice using all of those. Oh, and finally, you'll also be familiar with some of the built-in functionality that comes up a lot on different projects. So variables and conditions. So most people stop right here. They get comfortable doing the simple projects, they know how to use triggers, they know how to put stuff on the slide, and they know how to use the built-in quizzing, so then they're like, okay, I'm good, that's all I'll ever use. And that is really limiting yourself. It is not taking full advantage of Storyline, because Storyline can do so much more, and to really take advantage of those extra features, you'll need to know how to use variables and conditions. So this is where I would recommend going this extra mile, learning how to use these things well, and it will put you in the top half of the e-learning developers just because so many IDs shy away from these features. So put in the effort here and it will pay off. So here are some project ideas I have for you. And if you're not familiar with variables and conditions, this is just logic stuff. So if this variable is true, then jump to this slide. If it's false, then jump to the other slide. Okay, so the variable would be whatever's holding that true or false, and the condition would be, if it's true or if it's false. So let's check out some projects. So one I would suggest doing is to build a confidence meter. So I did a live session on how to build something like this, which I will link here. But basically at the beginning of a course, you can ask someone, how confident are you with this material? And if it's above a 5 on a scale of 5 through 10, maybe you bring them right into the quiz. Or if it's below a 5, maybe you bring them into like a review scene where you give them some more review content. So again, the variable would hold how confident they are, and then you would conditionally bring them to different scenes based off of what number that variable holds. So that's a good early project to practice this with. Another one is an avatar selector. And again, I did a live stream on this. The recording is on my YouTube channel, which I will link as well. And the idea here is you can choose between 3 avatars. So who do you want to be your coach, or choose your avatar. You can cycle through some options, and when you click one, it stores that avatar in the variable, and then when you're on the next slides, it will change the state of that avatar based off of what that variable holds. So again, it's just a good way to start conceptualizing how to use variables and conditions to dynamically show content, because that's how they're so useful most of the time. Another idea is a BuzzFeed style quiz. So you can have someone, which personality type are you? And you can show them 5 or 10 questions like, which of these outfits would you prefer to wear? Like, it can just be something fun, something that you care about or you're interested in. But the idea here is based off of their answers to the questions, you will modify certain variables, and then when they get to the end of the quiz, you'll bring them to a different slide based off of that variable's value, or those variables' values. So that's a very good practice project. I would recommend doing a custom quiz too. So instead of using the built-in quiz features, try to build like a 5 or 10 question custom quiz where you build all of your own triggers, you have your own variables to keep track of the score, and then you change what screen they see, either the pass or the fail screen, based on their score. So build that custom, it will be a good learning experience. Finally, take that custom menu screen to the next level and build a menu screen that tracks progress. So you would have a variable for these different slides and about whether they're viewed or not, and then you'll change a state of that menu item, maybe adding a check mark next to it, maybe graying it out based on the value of that variable. So these are all very important projects. And then finally, if you've gone through all of these and you're feeling pretty good about things, or even before that, you can play around with the eLearning Heroes Challenges. So I just Google eLearning Heroes Challenges to get here, and this is the Articulate community, and they post weekly challenges. So use this color of the year in e-learning design, customize your storyline interactions for Rise templates. Let's see, presenting opposing lists, converting static content into interactive e-learning. The idea here is that David Anderson, he posts a weekly challenge. He gives a little bit of context and maybe some examples, and then everyone in the community starts responding with their attempt at that challenge. So you can look at what other people are up to, you can post here and show off your work, and you can get feedback from the community. So it's it's a good community for learning storyline. Again, you have these constant project prompts. You can share your work, get feedback, see what other people are up to get inspiration. It's just overall, I do recommend going there either after you've done the projects I recommended, or I think even some of them might be some of these challenges. So you can just scroll through there. Like you saw, there are over 300 of them at the time of this recording. And yeah, it's a great way to learn with a community of people. So if you want to keep learning outside of that forum, I have some crowdcasts and YouTube videos that are all about learning storyline. Mark Spurman has an entire YouTube channel dedicated to storyline tutorials, which I will link below. This is a great resource though. And I spelled his name wrong, it's Mark, so ignore that typo, M-A-R-K. Sorry about that, Mark. And Ashley Chazon has another great YouTube channel with tons of articulate storyline screencasts. So that is another great resource for you to use along your journey. Main point here though is just don't forget to practice. It's one thing to watch these tutorials and see what other people are doing, but the way that you're actually going to get better is by opening up Storyline yourself, playing around in there, and trying to use these new features that you're learning about. So I hope that this was helpful. Feel free to reference it along your journey to learning Storyline. Yeah, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up if it was helpful. You can ask me any comments in the comments below. And if you're learning Storyline because you want to become an instructional designer, then I definitely suggest you check out my full guide, which is a YouTube video on how to become an ID, which again, I will link in the description. So thank you for making it to the end, and I will see you in the next video.